So I'm Shana Hanson, and I have no credentials to give this talk except that I'm up in trees all the time. And then I like to study things when I'm wandering with my goats, so it's good to go grab articles and have them with me in my bag. I wander with goats because I have a dairy herd that's based on just fresh greenery in the summer. I contract with people for the milk, and it's a promise of straight greenery. So it's a lot of time with goats if you have a drought and you don't have pasture paddocks growing very much. So it gives me a chance to study, to give talks on things that I don't know that much about. I hope that's okay. But the original idea was I like speaking for Low Impact Forestry because what I'm doing in the woods is a forestry practice. It's even in an old German forestry manual, Schneedelbaum, pruning for animals. And it's making a multi-layered canopy that is like very high species diversity for microbes, for wildlife, for the plants themselves, because you have all these different layers active. And one winter, a few winters back, I was studying the kind of cutting edge forestry stuff, and it was so inspiring. That's what partly made me wanting to be associating with LIF, where there's people looking at the gene pools of the beech trees, and figuring out if their selection method is increasing or decreasing the biodiversity of the species, etc. Just really, really caring deeply about their forests and looking closely at what goes on. And that was very inspiring, that the field of forestry is so focused on health and survival of ecosystems. So I thought, well, I'm spending all this time with goats, and I have 6 years of data of every day of what the goats ate in the woods, and I'm cutting up in trees for them, and I know I can tell you the nutritional windows for goats, right? So then, but originally in 2011, when I found the word pollard and I figured out that what I had just barely started to do was actually a traditional practice for the last 8,000 years, I went to my extension agent in Belfast area, and Rick Persbergen, and he looked up the word pollard, and I ended up getting connected immediately with Fred Cervello, who does deer browse literature, deer browse research, and he's at Maine or no. And he was kind enough to send me a pile of articles about deer browse, about this deep. So my initial studying for my goats was deer browse. So that gives me no credential, but a little bit of background of a conversation with Fred Cervello, who does have credentials in deer browse. And so last summer I had the first tree fodder seminar at my house, and Fred, I asked him if he would speak, and he couldn't. But he said he would make a question and answer document for us, looking at my goat browse data and surveying his compilation of deer browse data and applying it. And I copied the last couple pages of that for you, just because. And it says comments on reported use of Maine plants by goats. But the whole thing is about deer, because it's Fred. And so you can glean a lot. And of all the things that I read about deer browse, this was the most concise that I could copy in 2 pages. The machine, unfortunately, didn't hear me when I said make it double-sided. So there's that I'll just hand around because I'll forget later. And there's only a few of you. There. And so I have never met Fred Cervello, but he's been so supportive and responsive these couple times through the email and telephone. So I know through Fred and through my conversations that deer and goats eat similarly, quite similarly. In this he goes into, and probably you should save it for later, I'll give you a kind of summary that the small ungulates have a high pressure for nutrition, high metabolisms. They have to really select nutritious parts of plants. They can't just eat everything the way a cow does. So they're very attuned to which part of the plant has the energy, and there's all these antioxidant chemicals that the plants concentrate in places that they don't want browsed. So say a young cedar tree, I've got all young cedar trees coming up, and you would have thought my goats would wipe them out. White cedar is a high value forage for deer, goats, snowshoe hares, everybody, and in the winter especially. mainly in winter. And but my goats have let those grow tall. They eat the side shoots on a young tree. The tree probably is concentrating tannins or some other antiphytin. And a neighbor noticed that the one that was browsed by the deer next to the one that wasn't grew faster and better. It was stimulated. It certainly stimulates upward growth because it stopped everything sidewards. You know, this is a white cedar, and they're a really good staple in the winter. Fred says that deer still, Fred Cervello I'm talking about, who I haven't met personally, but he's been highly supportive of my deer browse research, you know, farmer research, over the years. He started by sending me a pile this big about deer browse and the anti-feeding chemicals and all the interactions and the bite, how to count bite counts and ways to research this stuff in 2011. And then last summer I did a tree fodder seminar, and he wrote us an article, this custom article for us to use for one of the workshops. And so I copied the last couple pages of it, and it's really about deer. Yeah, I think there's one copy. So I was just talking about that the antiphytins tell the animal where to browse, and that the deer and the goats, but you don't need to know about goats, it's not my topic, but that's where most of my background is, you know, where my observation is that I'm with goats. I don't even see that much what deer have eaten in my woods because the deer seem to give away for the goats that are in the same niche. Whereas the snowshoe hares I do see, they come out with us to the same things a lot of times. The hemlocks in the winter, if a big hemlock went down I kept seeing a snowshoe hare there every day. The cedars, so as far as felling dates, while we're on cedars, I told myself I should tell them just don't fell the white cedars. Because do you know how when they get icy, they drop those little fronds? And you'll see them on the snow, little pieces of white cedar greenery. If you walk in the woods, you'll see it. Especially lately, now that there's ice storms and winds and changes of temperature. And you get all these little green pieces, and I have seen snowshoe hares more than once doing exactly what me and the goats are at that moment out doing, which is all the goats want to do is pick those off the snow. So I'm sure the deer are doing the same thing. So the cedar trees are an ongoing fountain of food if you can keep them alive. So I do prune them for my goats. This isn't the subject of this. But if you do fell them, definitely do it in the winter. If there's deep snow and hard times, all the better. While we're on evergreens, which is a lot of, you know, if you're cutting saw logs and stuff, the firs and the pines, both my forester and Fred say they're lower down. Hemlock is next after cedar for conifers, for like deer browse and snowshoe browse. But last summer was a drought. My goats didn't want it as much. It's already high tannin, so if it's stressed, it could be more high tannin. And they like to have some moving water in the soil, aerated soil, but with a water source nearby. So maybe the drought stressed them. They didn't look bad, but it was one winter when I couldn't cut a lot of cedar for them. They probably didn't have a lot of new growth, but they were surviving okay. But then beyond that, Fred's the second page of that handout, he makes a list of the conifers that's identical to my goats. Kind of like the fir, and what my forester said is they can eat fir if they're hungry, but they're going to get really skinny on it. You know, Fred says they lose weight in the winter anyway. He's not sure if deer are just geared to lose weight in the winter. He says even with cedar, they're losing weight in the winter. But certainly not as much. They're pretty happy on cedar. And so you should tell me your experiences a little bit so I know who I'm speaking with. I should have probably started with that, but at least now we know kind of everybody's here, probably who's coming. Do you want to start over here and just say you know, a sentence about what you're up to, what your land is like?
I got a piece of property out in Franklin.
Maybe we should wait a moment to do this.
One thing
They'll be gone in a minute.
I've been compassing maple trees for firewood.
Okay.
And every single tree that I cut down, every shoot that came off of it is cut down to like 2 feet. And all nibbled off the top.
Right. So if you want coppiced firewood, if you're willing to do that kind of labor to get a little more wood up, you know, not have to split it. You might want to learn pollarding and come to one of my goat talks because it's above browse height. And I don't coppice anything because I'm walking with goats. And they do. They tip it and then they tip it again and you end up with 18,000 little sprouts in the same place and it's such diffused energy it never can get out of browse height. And sometimes they'll end up killing it if they're there a lot.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about.
Traditional coppicing has fences involved. When you cut the stuff, you're taking all the brush and making a fence out of it. And if you get Raymond Tabor's classic book, woodland, traditional woodland crafts, it's like an old book, and you can get a copy for $3 or something. I did recently, but he has lots of pictures and directions for different kind of fences around your coppice plot. Fencing was part of the picture. Even in Europe where they just got roe deer. Now maybe they had bigger deer then. I'm not sure. Yeah, so you definitely, if you're going to coppice, you want to keep them out and throw what you don't want on the outside of the fence for them to eat, or let them nibble it off of the fence when you make it. But red maple is a big bark for us as goats, and the buds, and they love the fruit buds. So they love a little bit old enough growth that it's mature and has fruit buds. And they strip all the bark off, unless it has been terrible drought and the tree was stressed, in which case they don't strip quite all the bark off. They also have trouble stripping bark when it's really, really cold. So if it's 0 degrees, don't expect the deer to come and strip the bark. They just can't get it off. It has to warm up a little bit. So, and I know my goats will strip ash bark if I get them in the habit. Now, goats have, and I know this about my deer have is what I meant to say. I know this about my goats too by observation, but I've read it in the scientific literature about deer, is that deer's microbes in their gut, and probably ours as well and most mammals, but we know it about deer, shift with the seasons based on their diet. So when they first come to a season to start eating something, they can eat a little bit of it, and then they eat a little more of it, and then the 3rd or 4th day they have that microbial shift, strip the bark. Willow also, you're probably not cutting willow in your woodland as much, but elm they may strip bark. Most of my elm I'm cutting in summer, so I'm not sure, but I know that the Swedes and Norwegians save bark for their animals for winter, and they ate it themselves in a famine year. You can eat elm leaves too, kind of mucilaginous. They're filling. Elm doesn't seem to be doing as well at my place in the shady places. It's doing okay in my pastures and where I'm pollarding it and stimulating it. It gets a little resistance from being so vigorous. Ash is a staple in the summer. Now I don't know, when deer are nursing, of course when anything is nursing, there's more nutritional pressure. But usually you have a great grass crop then, and everybody's kind of going towards the open lands if they're there. But I'm sure they would also go for ash, elm, basswood, any of the really sweeter fodder trees that were primary foods for livestock in Europe are also good deer foods and rabbit foods. And if you had a year when there was an early drought or something was really wrong with the grass situation, those would be great fallbacks. I had thoughts about so I was going to go around in here and then the train distracted me. So you said you have a piece of land and you're coppicing maples.
Yeah, just taking them down in the winter and letting them take down all but 1 or 2 of the trunks.
Okay, so you're kind of singling them, that would be called.
Yeah.
Well, they may be double.
So that then they're putting up 5-10 shoots and all of the shoots are getting eaten off.
Right, but at least you have those couple that you left for taller trees.
Yeah. The idea was that there would still be something up at the canopy to be getting the light to help everything else grow.
Right, kind of like in pollarding it would be called a sap riser, but it would be up on the tree at the top of the tree. Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. I haven't heard people do that with coppice. Usually they cut everything.
I mean, I'm still experimenting at this point.
It's
it seems
important.
to work quite well. I'm getting great shoots, but the deer really like it.
You know, relationship-based knowledge with you and your plants and that's where it's at. It's for you to have an instinct about it and try it and see how it works because you're on that ground and you're watching, you know, you observe it.
This is my first year really getting to see the deer eating it, so I'm gonna see how they grow after that. If the shoots continue to grow up.
Well, not if they keep eating them, but if you fence it, they may recover. And especially
all
if you...
spread out through the woods is the problem.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying not to put too much pressure on any one part.
Right.
Um,
Right. Maybe there's something else you can cut for them. So I want to keep going around though and hear what other people are doing. So, or what your land is like, or what your hopes are from this, or anything you want to say.
All right. Well, I'm just starting to learn how to maintain the woods on my property on the Adirondacks, upstate New York. So it's our second year there, so I'm just still kind of watching how things work and got the benefit of having one of the folks who owned the property previously and spent a lot of time managing it with him and just showing me a little bit. And I'm just starting to learn how things work and watch what's happening and deciding how to go about eventually taking our own wood from we just have to burn, so we need to sustain that.
Yeah, that's awesome to have a woodland passed to you that someone cared about and was involved enough to have some continuity of plan. That's
Absolutely.
awesome, and some communication about it. That's
Yeah, it's
awesome.
been important for him as well.
Oh, I bet.
So, yeah, definitely, that's been...
And also for you to be able to take some time and observe and think about your steps. That's awesome.
Yep, that's right. So that's where I'm at. I got a lot to learn.
Yeah, as do we all.
Yeah.
Do you want to say something about?
It's pretty overwhelming, but
Yeah.
2 years in. So
Wait a minute.
it's great though. You know, like it. You gotta make some mistakes, right? And,
They're very forgiving. You know, those root systems keep a plug-in. The hardwoods do.
I have this property that's wooded in Vienna, Maine, in Framingham,
I know where that is.
in the foothills of the mountains. My goal is to keep it as a sanctuary for wildlife.
Okay.
I have 2 acres,
Wait, how many? I'm sorry.
about 300.
Big piece. Yeah, nice.
And I've had a ecological study report done by ecologists on how to improve the habitat for wildlife. And I've had a forest management plan. And I'm not doing any commercial harvesting. I do take my firewood off it. And anything I can learn about improving habitat, protecting habitat for birds, or especially for raptors, owls, coyotes. I want to have a very diverse. I have some bear. I know bears.
That's why.
I have 10 acres of wetlands, and the rest is usually there's a lot of oak. It's oak and hemlock, major forest with a lot of beech as well, and ash and red maple.
Which they would say old succession, like that's
Right. There's some big oaks.
a
and then
long-lasting
there's
forest now with, you know,
some-
diseases and weather permitting. That's now a long-lived bunch of trees.
Yes, right. So
Species-wise.
actually, I hope someday that they're late succession, which would be a great thing to leave as a legacy.
Some big trees.
Yeah, because I don't know if you've heard of the Kennebec Highlands, which is a 6,000-acre preserve that we in Vienna and Rome have preserved.
I did not know. I've been to Vienna raking blueberries, and I
Oh,
have
yeah.
friends in Fayette that I used to play music with when I lived in Hartford, Maine,
Yeah.
but I don't know
Yeah,
that.
it's now managed by the Bureau of Public Lands, but it was acquired through a
I
land
see.
bank of nature. And,
I'm just hearing what people are doing.
unfortunately, before, there was 19 landowners who owned that property, that's 6,000 acres. Before the state acquired it as a preserve, they kind of cut it pretty heavily. So surrounding me is that preserve. So I'm trying to kind of make it more on the other side where there's long-lived
Right.
trees to have a more,
Acorn crops.
right, to have a more diverse landscape.
Cover it gets windy.
So I have to like manage it in the context of a lot of other land that's been cut heavily.
Right. In other words, you're looking at the bigger picture, and this is not needed, and this is needed.
That's right.
And
Right,
thinking
right.
about that, that's awesome. And
I just got a property and I'm still learning. It's been pretty heavily cut, but it's forested. And when the songbird migration went through in the spring, it was phenomenal. And certain species of songbirds stayed put. So now it's making me think I don't want to change that habitat. So I need to figure out what I'm
how to
going
keep it there.
Yeah, I want to keep it there, but manage it and pull firewood out. So,
And
Where
is
was your
it
property?
New Hampshire.
how much canopy closure? How much undergrowth? What's there?
It's
Applying his knowledge to that. So of course, when the winter's deeper and things can't get to stuff, that's when you want to think about, oh, if I want to be cutting that ash firewood now, maybe they'll want the bark, especially if it's a little bit of a thaw, or not even a thaw, but even above 20, they might be able to strip that bark. Below 0, they can't strip it. So it'll wait. It'll be maybe okay still later. But they won't get it right away. I did look into cottontails, because there's do people know about the New England cottontails? Not many around. They're in southern Maine, right?
Only in southern Maine.
Only in southern Maine. And down there, it looks like they're maybe almost paying people to make habitat.
Right. Because it is a species of concern in Maine.
Right,
But there's none, like I live in
None
Buckeye,
here.
which is central Maine. There is no cottontail there.
right.
of course.
And none by me in Belfast, as far as I know. But it was interesting, because for them, they're making a bushy layer, and they're making at least 10-acre chunks.
That's a whole
And then
general habitat.
the literature is recommending all this herbicide and not wanting invasives. I do want to say a thing about invasives, just that the buckthorn is really, really nutritious. It holds its leaves really longer than any other plant. And
Nothing eats it out
no,
in the
everything
woods, though.
eats it though. Yeah, the deer eat it. That's why it's called buckthorn. The
Not
goats eat
eating
it like
mine. I
crazy.
wish they
They're not
would.
eating enough. Interesting. Wonder what that's about. Have you? Is it in their reach? It doesn't have a browse line on it. Interesting. They must be eating something else that's good too. Yeah. Well, when there's acorns, they don't. There's not much competition with beyond acorns. Like if everybody has acorns, they're pretty focused on the acorns. But there are years without acorns, and so it'd be interesting to watch in a year without acorns whether your buckthorn gets hit, because it is highly nutritious and it holds longer than oak leaves. Green, it stays green really well, and it's fairly drought resilient. And at my place, it's not invasive, because I'm walking with goats all the time, and they just hit it hard all the time. They'll even strip the bark in the winter.
Actually, the woman at the invasive species booth the other day had mentioned about the bamboo coming up, which is an awful problem.
The
That's what-
knotweed, Japanese knotweed.
knotweed,
That
and-
cured my Lyme,
But-
but it's terribly invasive. And
Right, but she was saying about using goats. I'm like, well, have you come up with any new ideas how to get rid of that?
I do stake
Put
my
the goats in there and let them.
Yeah.
Won't kill it, but at least it keeps it kind of at
Right,
bay.
I'm keeping mine from seeding by, once a summer I'll stake the goats there, or we'll just come through. Recently they went through, my stream is dry, it's in my stream. It came from the town digging where they weren't supposed to in the stream. And it came with plastic mesh that was supposed to keep it where, so it's impossible to dig out. But it's not a staple for them, but they eat it fairly heavily in the context of eating other things too. And if you did cut it for them and bring it to them, they would eat it up. And put it in and my pigs will also, I believe. But I don't really want to move it around because it might root, So, yeah, knotweed's hard, and they sell it for $15 a dried pound, the root for medicine. It's anti-cancer, it's got resveratrol like grape seeds, it cured my joints from Lyme. It's an amazing medicine, and we could be digging it up and selling it. They're shipping it from China through the West Coast to sell for $15 a dried pound, but here it's just
It only
invasive that
grows
we don't want.
everywhere.
What's that?
It only grows everywhere.
I know, but it takes labor to clean, and there's cheap labor there, and they're growing it from plugs so that they have lots of straight, similar age roots, versus when you're digging up an old patch, it's all nubby and more awful to clean. So so anyway, so thinking about nut crops and when those might be useful and who's going to get them, just to be aware of thinking of, well, what change does this make when I fell this tree, and is that okay? That now the squirrels might get less, someone else might get more. Maybe the seeds won't be mature to grow when they bury them, but maybe I already have tons of young oaks coming up and I don't care about that. Another thing, of course, to think about is shelter. So I read about bat hibernaculum. You've got a dead tree with loose bark, and you've got bats congregating in there to hibernate for a good chunk of the year. Definitely don't want to hit that. That's not about a felling date, but it's about a date when you're felling, to watch out for that. And apparently the stuff on the bats that are endangered, is it the brown bats or the large brown bats? I have notes here somewhere. The small bats. Long-eared bats are endangered. And they say don't cut near a nursery from June 1st to July 31st, but then they say hibernaculum, don't cut there ever. Apparently they sleep there at night even in the summer. They use it maybe all year. Hibernaculum, where they hibernate. I just learned that word too. Don't feel I'm glad you could ask questions. Hill, what is that? It's a great word, and that's why I'm using it. My new word for the week. So bats are just liking bugs. So they're not going to get much food off your trees, but just to be aware that they're there. They may be there, and that's where they house. I looked up horned owls because I had a whole clutch of horned owls get raised in my woods. Found out that they nest in other big raptor nests. They reuse them. So you see a big old nest and you're like, those guys were there last year, the goshawks or whoever. So they're done with that. So and then it turns out that and that it's full of great horned owls. And this is in winter. They start their babies in February. That's when they come and hit my geese, if they do, because they're looking for a lot of nutrition when they're raising babies. February, March.
You got bats that are any tips on relocating bats from barns or like the eaves of the house into bat boxes or something else like that? Because I want them around, but I got to get them out of certain areas.
There was quite a bit on the internet available about that. There's kind of organizations putting out stuff and having you call them. So I'm not going to say too much about it because I didn't study up on it, but I do know that people are focusing on that, which is good. So that the help should be there.
I didn't know whether if I put bat boxes out and make them available, whether they'll use those. But I have a feeling they'll probably stay with them.
Well, I know. I mean, they get them out and then they make it where they can't get back in again. So they have to look for somewhere.
Well, that's the
Just
thing.
don't do it when they have young.
Right.
That was where the
Good
dates
point.
you just said. So in fact, I read that it's illegal to actually evict them from your house in your barn when they have young because they're endangered. So the trick
Some
is
of
wait
them.
till
Some of
now,
them.
this time of year, and evict them.
Right. Right, because in winter they're hibernating. That's not good either.
Just prepare in the evening when they're out or something, wait for them to fly out and patch up the holes.
Yeah, exactly. And provide some good choices.
Yeah, right.
Is the best you can do. Yeah. And so pileated woodpeckers are, I'm trying to have as many woodpeckers as possible because I love ash fodder for my goats. All of Austria was based on ash fodder. A lot of Europe used ash fodder for their animals. More leaf hay was stored than grass hay till 1900 in Europe. They were making leaf hay for animals with stone implements before the Iron Age. And